Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, stories, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out the articles, videos, and more at passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, join the community forum, and of course, attend the weekly online Global Passive House Happy Hour. Now, here's this week's Passive House podcast. G'day, welcome back to the Passive House podcast. My name's Matthew Cutler-Welsh. I'm coming to you from Auckland in New Zealand.
I'm Zach Semke, coming to you from Seattle.
How are things in Seattle, Zach?
They're beautiful, and there's been some good news this week. A big case involving George Floyd, of course, is one of those pieces of important news, and another is Biden's announcement today that the U.S. will be committing to reducing greenhouse gas emissions by about 50% by 2030, which is fairly breathtaking. Of course, the devil's in the details, but that aligns the U.S.'s goals around climate action with a pathway to 1.5 degrees Celsius, limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is pretty phenomenal. So good.
The thing
good
I
step
like,
in the right direction.
the thing that is a big step. The thing I like about 2030 is that it's not 2050.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's going to come pretty fast.
Yeah, right.
Which means that people, we actually have to do something. It's very easy to make these lofty goals. 2050 is kind of out there, and it sounds great, but you can kind of get away without doing much. But for 2030, you got to start putting things in place to make that happen pretty darn quickly.
Right. Immediate implications and implications that really go economy wide, and certainly impact buildings and our plans around new and existing buildings. So it's great stuff.
Yeah, and that's a lot about what we're talking about today is having that impact on the building industry. Exciting stuff down here, I should mention. We have a consultation out at the moment over the next couple of weeks for changes to our building code, the New Zealand building code, and specifically the energy efficiency part of that building code as well. Now, on a global scale, the changes proposed are fairly modest, I'd have to say, putting it politely. But this is a really good opportunity for people to get active, get involved, and to let their thoughts be heard as to just how far and how fast we should go, because the government has said here that that's what they want to know. So I'm encouraging all my colleagues in this part of the world to let the government know loudly and clearly that we want to move very far and very fast when it comes to building performance, which is definitely the topic of conversation for today. But before we get into that, we got some people to thank for helping to bring us the Passive House podcast.
We do. So our sponsors make all of this possible, both the podcast and then all of our other programming at Passive House Accelerator. And this is a kind of a momentous moment because a momentous moment, that's a little redundant, but hey, because we've had a 2 years now of support from founding sponsors who have joined to help launch this platform. These are major sponsors who have joined us early enough along to truly make the accelerator happen and be possible. So we were extremely grateful to this group, and we just completed our circle of founding sponsors. So we are happy to welcome Rockwool as the final founding sponsor, and these organizations provide sustaining support, of course, to our work. So I want to thank all of them right now. 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxt Ingwe Architects, Glavel Foam Glass Gravel, Minutair All-in-One HVAC and Dehumidification, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, RDH Building Science, Rockwool, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. And our stakeholder partner is NYSERDA. So thank you to all those supporters.
I've had a few people say recently that they perceive the Passive House Accelerator as being American-centric. But I have to say, particularly with some of those supporters, they're everywhere. And that's what the great thing about not just them, but the accelerator in general is that this is so relevant in so many places. And even if they are maybe located in parts of America or different parts of the world, they outreach. I mean, so many people that I know of refer to 475 for their product information outside of America, just because they provide such great content on their YouTube channel. It's awesome. But also the reach of the people like RDH and Stowe. It's so great to have that global community, and it is, like Passive House, relevant all over the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So
Partel
really
and
appreciate
Rockwell too. Yeah. No, and absolutely. And we certainly have lots of participation at the accelerator from Canadians as well. So it's not just US. And I would say that while it's true that a lot of the initiative has started in North America, we certainly don't intend to be focused only on North America. And Matthew, you're helping us out with that very much.
Well, it works for me. Time zones of the happy hour and the Tech Tuesday work out pretty well. So I definitely take my hat off to our friends in Europe who occasionally show up.
I know,
some of them regularly show up for the happy hour, which is often around about midnight for them if they're coming live.
Or
but
later.
You can catch those. Don't forget, you can catch those on video as well. If you miss out and you want to check out those great presentations, there's a huge library available. So whatever time zone you're in, you can catch those at any time. All right, let's get into this week's interview. I had the very great pleasure of catching up with Robyn, which you referred her to me. So thank you for that, Zach.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
And the reason for that is because Robyn is one of the speakers at the summit, which will be launching, will be happening the same day this podcast comes out.
That's right. Yeah, the Passive House Policy Summit. Yep.
So, very excellent guest for that summit, because Robyn's work has been instrumental in what a lot of us probably are quite familiar with, which is the energy step code. And this is a fantastic piece of policy, which when I first heard about it, it was one of those, oh my gosh, this is so obvious moments where I can't understand why all energy codes or all building codes are not done in this way. Essentially, it's got two main features. One is performance based. So it's looking at how buildings actually perform, not just how they're hypothetically designed or put together. And it ramps things up. It gradually ratchets up higher and higher standards at a known and forecast rate. So the whole industry knows where they need to be performing at certain points in time. And interestingly, what that generally does is have the industry go faster than that, because they know that they're going to have to hit those targets. It's been implemented in certain areas, meaning that it will become the code. It will be mandatory, those ratcheting up standards. And like I said, that sounds really, really obvious. But there are some challenges to implementing things in that way, which Robyn and her team have alluded to. So Robyn is the manager advanced demand side management, which she explains a little bit about, at BC Hydro, which is one of the big utilities of British Columbia. She's done a lot of work with empowering organisations and generally around networks to create low carbon communities. And her work in various fields has won awards from the the Real Estate Foundation of British Columbia, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, Canadian Institute of Planners, and the Planning Institute of British Columbia. And in 2013, she was awarded the PIBC Individual Award for Leadership and in Advocacy and Innovation. So it was a great honour and privilege to have a conversation with Robyn and for her to also be involved in the Policy Summit. So here is my chat with Robyn Wark from BC Hydro. Well, thank you very much, Robyn, for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you on the show, because I know that for myself, I've been pretty excited about the step code ever since I heard about that. But before we get into the details of that, tell us a little bit about BC Hydro and what you do there and what your role is.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's great to chat to you. I work for BC Hydro in our conservation and energy management group. So as a utility, we have a goal set by the province to be able to meet 66% of all new growth through demand side management, so through conservation. So that's been in place for many years. So there's different ways that we can get conservation. We can put incentives in place like fridge buyback. We can do programs with industrial customers, commercial customers, etc. But perhaps one of the most cost-effective and useful things we can do to back all that up is to put codes in place so that we lock in those savings that we're seeing through those market leaders and just put them as the laws of the land, if you will. So our group is all around working with industry and government to work out regulations that can be put in place for green buildings. And now with more climate goals being provided by the government, green transportation as well. So using low carbon electricity for transportation and buildings.
Did you say fridge buyback?
Yeah, you don't have that in New Zealand?
Well, we have a lot of encouragement of people getting. So what tends to happen is, it's a brilliant idea, because what tends to happen is there's a promotion about upgrading fridges, but then people just keep the old one as a spare in the garage, and then you just got two fridges. So is that what I think it is? You take old fridges.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we have a whole range of residential programs, from like behavior programs, like consumer rebates on like equipment, etc. And yeah, we've had in the past a fridge buyback plan where we take clunky old fridges and buy them back.
BC Hydro is a power company, right?
Yeah, that's right. We're the Crown Corporation here in BC, providing electricity to most of the province.
So now most companies want to increase the demand for what they sell. Why is that different for a utility? Why are you trying to encourage people to use less of what you sell?
Yeah, that blows people's minds a bit, doesn't it? It's a requirement from the government that we're a growing population, so we have a growing demand. But rather than build new infrastructure, we have to limit the amount of new infrastructure we build by instead investing in conservation. So it's called demand side management, and we've been set targets from the government, and then we have to work out how we meet those targets, and that's through our conservation programs.
And I think that's a key concept, because it's not unique to BC Hydro. My understanding is that's the situation that you're in, where it's an entity which basically has a monopoly in that region, has some ownership by, in your case, the Crown or some sort of government ownership. That's a fairly common situation around the world, my understanding is.
Yeah, that's right. And it's not singular to government-owned utilities. There's private utilities as well that are also set these demand-side management goals, these conservation goals. And so they have a range of different programs. Again, often incentives giving to consumers, but increasingly we're seeing utilities looking at how they can support regulatory change.
And as well as that sort of directive from above, is it also of benefit to you as a company for electricity usage to be a little bit more consistent and predictable rather than having lots of highs and lows?
Yeah, so I mean, it's the most cost-effective way of meeting new demand is through conservation, like flattening that down. It's typically we have cost tests, but it typically costs less to get people to use less than to build new infrastructure. So there's that benefit. Your question around sort of peaks and how our electricity is used, we're looking at it increasingly. It's called capacity-based demand-side management, where we look at how can we influence the timing of the way that our electricity is used, so that we don't have to build as much infrastructure, or we can be more strategic in our use of infrastructure. So that's certainly something that we and other utilities are looking at as well.
Now, as well as your work in that demand-side management, BC Hydro, you've been working as, you're currently co-vice chair of the Energy Step Code Council, and you've got a few other things on the go as well. How does that tie into your day job?
Yeah, it's all part of the day job. So part of our looking at how we can support regulations around energy conservation was through working with government around the building code. And when I say government, I don't just mean the provincial government, but also local governments who are administering the building codes and administering land use planning and building departments around compliance of codes. And so we've been doing that for 10, 12 years. And that's how my involvement in the Energy Step Code came about.
For those that haven't delved into it, how do you sum up what the Energy Step Code is?
It is a performance-based code, and an envelope-first performance-based code. So making sure that you got a really solid envelope, airtight envelope first, and then you've got good equipment inside. And then it's a series of steps. So we identified what's the most efficient building that we should be building towards. That's like a passive house level equivalent. So super energy efficient. And then we looked at our industry and said, well, how do we get there from here? Because at the moment we're not building anywhere near that, or this was developed about 5 years ago, and we weren't anywhere near that. And so others might have heard of it called a stretch code, where you put a series of steps between where you are now and where you want to get to, and sort of like as a pathway to get there. We used to call it the stretch code, and then we realized that we weren't necessarily going to get the uptake we wanted to, because stretch sounded like a bit scary or a bit like, oof, it sounds a bit dangerous. Whereas exactly, we didn't want to be painful.
Too much like exercise.
We wanted it to be more like, it's an easy step up a ladder to where we want to go to collectively. So we have a series of, it depends on the building type, anywhere between 3 to 5 steps to get from where we were back in 2017 through to where we need to get to as soon as possible. But we've said that the base building code will get there in 2032 here in BC.
Who's we when you talk about the people putting this together and what it actually means in terms of law or codes? Mm-hmm. Who's we?
Well, I guess officially it's the government. So it's the province is going to be putting it into the base building code, BC Building Code. So we've got 3 dates, 2022, which is next year, where the BC Building Code will be 20% above code, 2027, which is 40%, and then 2032, where it has to be 80%.
Above the current code.
Exactly, right. Exactly. But the whole idea of the STEP code was that local governments didn't have to wait for those dates. They could, because it's a roadmap and we know that's where the code's going to go, they were given permission to be able to adopt steps earlier than that. And similarly, utilities could choose to incent to different steps Professional associations can do training for their members to different steps. People could market their buildings if they wanted to one of those steps. So it's really helpful to have that roadmap of where we're going to go to, so that we can use all the different levers of market transformation, and we can all be pointing to it in the same way and having that same conversation. So when I say we, I'm not just talking about government. I'm talking about the thousands and thousands of people here in BC who are involved in driving this market transformation. And that's overseen by the Energy Step Code Council, which I'm the co-vice chair of. So the leadership is myself, Zach May, who's the chair from the province, and then one of our leading builders here in BC, Bob Deeks.
Is there any particular incident or moment that you can point to as being the genesis of creating not just the code, but I guess the permission to create the code in the first place? Or was it the sort of culmination of a bunch of events? How did it come to exist?
Yeah, it's a great question. We've got a document that we wrote called The Lessons from the BC Energy Step Code. So as part of that, we did a bunch of interviews with all the different people who were involved in it. And you realized how many different parts of the story there were, if you will. So everyone sort of started it from a different angle, whether you were the City of Vancouver doing real leadership work as one jurisdiction within British Columbia. They were the one jurisdiction that could go above BC Building Code, and just they've been real leaders here in the province. So that leadership work. Others would point to, we might point to our investment with local governments for the last decade or so, giving them the expertise to try and oversee better buildings here in BC. Perhaps the one that I'd point to, though, as perhaps the genesis was a white paper that was written in 2015, where we realized it was really difficult for utilities or for government to say, well, if you want to build better than code, what do you build to? And at the time, it was so confusing for me. Like, I'm not a super technical person. Like, do you point to, like, some people were pointing to Passive House, others Net Zero Energy Homes, LEED, Energy Star, better than ASHRAE, etc. And I didn't know how those all matched up and which one you should be pointing to, and which ones performed better and how that would look in the marketplace. And so the whole idea of this white paper was to like sift through all that and say, what do we in BC want to point to for those people who want to go above code? And so we were able to put together this proposal for a performance-based series of steps that people could point to. And it was a concept, so it was a white paper. And then as there was more and more desire for consistency here in BC, because different local governments were requiring different things or incenting different things, that group then came together. The province brought down a building act and said, hey, local governments, stop doing different things. And so then this group came together, a multi-stakeholder group, and said, okay, but fair enough that we do want to build better buildings. What should we be pointing to? And that was the genesis of the development of the STEP Code.
And has there been any resistance from any areas, particularly manufacturers, product suppliers, developers, the traditional barriers that come up whenever you talk about building better because it sounds more expensive? Have there been some significant pushback?
I think one of the beauties of the process, because I've worked within local government, and the real challenge for a builder or developer, if you're in the middle of your project and all of a sudden the goalposts change and it doesn't work for your pro forma. When we came together to design the STEP Code, it was really helpful that we weren't talking about something for next year. We were saying, like, this is by 2032, this is where we want to get to. And so it just let people kind of maybe chill a bit and think, like, nobody was objecting to the fact that we need to be building better buildings. The question was how and what does that transition look like and how do we do it affordably? And so I think with government's clarity that they did want to build that, then we were able to lean on our industry partners to help inform us what would that look like? Like, how fast should this go? What should the code include? What should it look like? How do you deal with compliance and certainty? How do you deal with everyone adopting it in the same sort of way? So there were definitely moments where no industry association particularly wants to be regulated. Like, no builder's going to say, yeah, bring down a more stringent code. But I think that we were looking far enough out onto the horizon that it wasn't threatening any immediate projects. And instead, we were able to come together as a group and look at a reasonable pathway. And the people go. Sorry.
Well, yeah, because the other thing is, how have you managed to lock that in, given that you've got election cycles as well, and that's often the long-term horizon for a lot of policy is the next election. So how have you managed to get the government as well as the industry to lock in that longer-term view?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. We did a lot of work with us as a group, which the group that became the Step Code Council, on getting everyone's voices heard, and then using everyone's voices to report out and to consult on what we were doing. So we had the Urban Development Institute or the Canadian Home Builders Association. They provided input into the code, and then we would we as a utility, we would provide funding and support, or like consistent like PowerPoint decks or whatever that looked like, whatever those groups needed, to be able to go and consult with their members on it. So I think that as you're hearing this from many different groups and many different voices, there's a sense of momentum that this is happening. It was actually, when we published the guide to or a recommended guide for rolling this out, it was the last act. We just got it signed off by one provincial party, and then there was an election and another provincial party came in. But I think it was getting all of those logos on the document, all that, we did costing studies, etc. That sense of, yes, we had consulted and people were on board, I think gave the government a sense of confidence to move forward. And then since then, well, we haven't got the 2022 code in place, but it is referenced in other government documents like climate action plans, etc., going forward. And then seeing the massive uptake of the code by the local governments here in BC, I think has made it so much easier at a provincial scale to be able to say yes, which I hope they will do for 2022.
There must have been a time early on when you're a bit nervous that you'd done all this work and post-election it could just all get thrown out.
I was more nervous that we wouldn't get it in front of the government to sign off before the election, to be honest.
Right.
Because, you got your political cycles, and I think it's one thing you really need to keep an eye on is when are the political cycles. And for us, it was both when the province could sign off on the policy before they called election, and then we had about a year before the local government elections. So how could we, maybe it was 18 months, how could we support as many local governments as possible in adopting or signing on to adopt the STEP code before there was a change of government? Like you want to see a launch, you want to see a momentum, you want to see an inevitability of like, wow, I guess we should because others are. And so I think because we had so many great local governments who were sitting around the table with really great capacity, who are really urging for a tool that they could use. Once it was given to them by the province, I was pretty confident that they would take it up, and that happened. Like within a year of it being made available to local governments, we had about 15 local governments, which made up over half of all building permits in BC, adopt it. So adopt one of the steps.
I guess that's a really important lesson for other people in other wherever they are in the world, is to remember that there are different levels of government, and it's not about getting something over the line at even a national or a state level, that you've got to keep up that campaign and get things over the line at a really local level as well until you get the momentum.
Yeah, I mean, I've done presentations on this to different audiences, and I think we're a bit unique here in BC. We often see the big cities who've got more independence go, like your San Franciscos, your New Yorks, your Vancouvers, do great leadership work. And then the rest seems to be left up to the state or the province or the national level. Whereas I think here in BC, we've recognized that Vancouver only makes up 10%, about 10, 12% of the population here. So if we're just relying on Vancouver, there's 90% of action that's happening that's not being targeted. And those areas are able to, all they can do is to build to base code. And so, what we've been doing as a utility is in investing in capacity in those, large, medium-size municipalities, or the very small ones, like this. Sorry, or the champion small ones, I should say.
Right.
So even though there's about 189 municipalities here in BC, we just, our partnerships are heavily invested in the largest, like 15 to 20, and then they're able to provide leadership to the smaller ones, or those other ones. So. Yeah, I think that the local government, leaning on local government leadership, especially those medium-sized ones that are sometimes aren't as high profile as your large ones, provides terrific opportunity to be able to test and drive forward codes that maybe could be a bit challenging for the very small places which don't have the capacity.
I like that idea of the champion regions, focusing on those ones that really are making that change, not necessarily massive ones. Who are you aware of that's following your lead? Are there other places that are doing similar type of roadmap codes that are looking at that stepped change over a period of time?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're not unique in this idea. As I say, elsewhere in North America, they call it more like the stretch code. So I think they've done it in Massachusetts and other places down in the States. Here in Canada, we have a national, they called it a tier code rather than step code, but same idea, and leaning heavily on the lessons that we have here in BC. So that's getting worked on. So yeah, I think that idea of providing that clarity for builders around where code is going, and then again for utilities and others who are offering incentives to lock into, I think that's becoming a more embraced idea.
Yeah, I mean, I could almost flip that question around and say, why isn't everyone doing it? Because it looks, sounds, and is so obvious once you see all the benefits. Why do you think that it's not being up? This approach isn't being taken up in pretty much everywhere, or are there ways that you're starting to see that happen now?
I'd say that it's the fact that we're using performance-based code has allowed us to give out that roadmap in a clearer way. Like when you're talking about prescriptive codes about what you should be including in buildings, it's much more difficult to work out, well, what would you include in a building that was 20% or 40% or 80%? Whereas if you're just looking at the outcome of actually how that building's performing, then it just ends up being like a small table that you can slide into the code. So it's much more easy to put into place. Now, when that's the case, you absolutely need to be investing in, the compliance side, the modeling side, all that capacity building that we've been focusing on. But I think from a codes direction perspective, it's probably much more simple than all the prescriptive codes that could be. I think, the one that we were referring to here in BC for homes was like, I don't know, 140 pages. So really challenging to do compliance work with such a complicated code, and also challenging to portray what that would look like in many years to come. So I think most of the high performance building certifications like Energy Star, like Built Green, like Passive House. They're performance based. I think that's been very helpful for our codes development too.
Yeah. So just to finish off with, any tips for people who are wanting to initiate something if this type of not just performance-based but also a roadmap approach doesn't exist? What would you say is the starting point for someone to get that off the ground if nothing like it is in place?
Yeah, for sure. So, I did quite a lot of thinking about that, which is, what we put into this document called Lessons from the BC Energy Step Code, which really told our story about how the Step Code came about for us. And then I went over to Nova Scotia and did a workshop with that jurisdiction. And the fundamental sort of base grounding is to know your industry, know what capacity you have, know who your leaders are within your jurisdiction. Because I believe there's leaders in every industry group, whether it's architects, engineers, planners, building officials, who want to see better quality buildings and who can report out on the buildings that they're building, often voluntarily to a far higher standard. And getting them talking and being leaders with their own member organizations around what's happening in their jurisdiction. So we did a bit of a scan in Nova Scotia where we had a workshop where we talked about the stories of what had happened in BC and sort of how our stuff had come about. But then before that workshop, had done a survey with these sort of leading organizations within Nova Scotia and said, like, where are you at? Like, where are your pain points? Where are you excelling at? Like, they'd done way more than us, for example, on heat pumps from a market penetration perspective. So they were leading from us in some ways, and then they had lessons from us in another. But I think that it's identifying those leaders, those champions within your organizations who you can partner with to be able to bring about that change. And there's one other thing that I would note about a weakness of the STEP code is that it is an energy performance code. It's not a carbon performance code. And so it's something that a lot of local governments have been had some angst over from the beginning. Like, they wanted to put carbon metrics into the STEP code. It didn't get in the first time around, but now we're working on getting those carbon metrics like Vancouver has into their code. We're calling it greenhouse gas intensity metrics as well as energy use intensity. So I think that's an important thing. If people are looking at codes and how they can update and modify and modernize their codes, if you're looking at it from a climate action perspective, I don't think it's enough to just look at energy use. I think you also need to explicitly be measuring carbon if that's what you're aiming to reduce.
How do you personally feel about the future
of codes?
Of what you've created and contributed to, particularly in the building industry?
I mean, I think it's been a wonderful experience working with all of the stakeholders and partners that we have here in BC. It's so encouraging to see that everyone wants to do the right thing. The question is, how can we do it in an affordable, reasonable fashion? But the bigger question is, how can we do this in the speed that that government is leaning on us to be able to meet carbon requirements? And I think the new construction is definitely the easiest sector to look at. We're now looking in BC at the alteration code for existing buildings, or an alteration code for existing buildings. And that's obviously way more challenging. But if we're looking at the building sector and how to reduce carbon overall, we need to be looking at that existing building sector. And we look at places like New York. I know you were interviewing Tom about what they're doing with their carbon caps and carbon requirements for existing buildings. We're looking at the same thing. Vancouver is taking a leadership role again, but it's a tough nut to crack.
That is a tough one.
It's something that we need to be really focusing on. to be able to look at the transformation that's being required of us from these targets.
I very much look forward to having you back to talk about how you've cracked that nut and looking at a step code for performance targets of the transition of existing building stock. Because again, that is something that is relevant around the whole world to all jurisdictions, wherever people are, wherever there are buildings. You're right, it's hard work, but it's the challenge that's out there.
For sure.
Awesome. Hey, well, thank you very much for your time, Robyn. Really appreciate it. And for all your work and contribution to this, as well as all the other people that you've mentioned that have been part of this. And yeah, I just want to highlight that it has rippled out well beyond British Columbia. I mean, I'm in Auckland. I've heard about it. I'm inspired by it. So it's definitely making waves well beyond what you've just done locally. And I think that's part of what we're trying to do with Accelerate as well, is spread the message beyond just our one or two projects.
That's great. Thanks so much for having me.
And that was Robyn Wark from BC Hydro, and also the co-vice chair of the Energy Step Code Council, as well as various other things that she's busy with as well, doing some great leadership around energy action, but also which we didn't talk about, she's a mentor in C40 cities and Women for Climate. So she's very, very busy and a great leader. What did you take out of that interview, Zach?
Well, the power of clarity, the work that she and so many others have done to clarify what the goal needs to be in terms of energy performance, and she alluded to also wanting to evolve that to greenhouse gas intensity of buildings. But to going from a place before that white paper was written in 2015, where there are all this smorgasbord of different approaches to green building that were confusing. It was difficult to, you're comparing apples and oranges and not really understanding which one of these would really move the needle, to coming up with a performance-based target and then helping the industry understand where things are headed in the next 10 or so years, and then creating those steps. I mean, that it's so powerful for aligning our collective action in all levels of the building industry and economy. So, it's so exciting to see what they've accomplished in British Columbia.
It is, and that clarity, I guess, is part of what made me think that when I first heard about the Energy Step Code, that it just seemed so obvious, and I couldn't understand why others aren't doing it. And I still have a little bit of that feeling, as why are we not all doing this? Because as soon as you explain it to people, say, oh yeah, it's a roadmap. It's not an unknown concept, yet it does seem that there are some challenges to implementing this type of code that has performance at its core. So it's not just saying use this particular R value or use these particular building techniques and we'll approve your building. It's saying you can design it how you like, but it has to meet these targets, and we will be measuring that in some way. And in this case, air tightness is one of those key measurement metrics, which is, I always talk about as being so valuable, because it's one thing that you can actually quantify. That's one of the useful aspects of air tightness testing, is that it gives you a repeatable scientific measure of the quality of the building envelope. And there are very few things that you could actually measure with that degree of quantification. So having measurable performance targets is at the core, but the other is that really key aspect of having mandatory minimums that will raise over time in a very predictable way, and people aren't having to wait till the next election cycle to see which direction things are going to go, and have that constant uncertainty, which is really good for the market. It just makes a lot of sense for product suppliers, for designers, for planners, for building owners, developers, because they know where things are going to be. They know where the goalposts are going to be. And sure, the goalposts are going to move, but it's very predictable about when they're going to move and how far they're going to move.
Yeah.
So
super clear market signal. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why I'm really excited to have Robyn on the show and to have her speak at the summit, because I just really encourage everyone out there to think about how something similar can be implemented wherever you are, not just around other parts of Canada, but here in New Zealand, we've got this consultation right now, and this is something that I'm really going to be pitching for. How can we move to a more performance-based model of our building code? And if it can be done in Vancouver, done in British Columbia, it can be done anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. We should take a moment also to give Passive House Canada a big shout out. Because
yes.
a critical piece of this, I mean, on both technical grounds and the advocacy grounds, and I want to talk about the advocacy piece, and that because I think that political will is so important for this sort of transformative policy to happen. So you need it.
Yeah.
You need it. I think part of it is you need it from the top, but you also need to have really effective organizations and leaders showing what's possible and advocating for a performance-based approach to building, like Passive House, and Passive House Canada played, I think, such an instrumental role in all of that, and it can be, I think, an inspiration to other Passive House institutions around the world as they're thinking, in terms of providing an example for moving the needle. I think that the clarity, the downside of having clarity in a policy, I mean, it's critical. The clarity is critical. So any policy that's going to make a difference is going to also encounter headwinds from kind of the usual suspects of folks who are going to try to bat it down. So there are opponents to any code progress.
Because difference implies change, and change
right, exactly.
is painful.
Yeah. So that, again, that, the political will, the advocacy at the from the grassroots to the, what do they call it, the grass tops, and the elected leadership is important. So when those things can come together, and they did in British Columbia, you can see what can happen. And I think that what's exciting in this moment is that there are more and more national and subnational governments who are getting serious about action around climate. And so I think that then we need to make sure as Passive House advocates and all of the organizations around the world that we're ready to take advantage of the moment.
Robyn used the word "we" quite a lot during that, and I get the sense that she was implying and alluding to the fact that there was a team effort. There were lots of people involved in this, and there were lots of individual conversations with people to get politicians over the line, get industry players over the line, get them to see the benefits. There's a really great trick with politicians and all people really is to, particularly politicians though, is to make them think that it was their idea. So if you can have these conversations and plant a seed, and hey, if they want to change the name of something and call it their own, whatever works, but if you can sort of be instrumental in having them think that they've come up with some great idea, let them run with it. Something else subtle that she did talk about, which I think we can always be better at, is marketing. And she mentioned initially they were just sort of brainstorming and calling it the stretch goal, or the stretch code, and then change it. It seems a subtle change, changing it from stretch to step, but it does point to that importance of marketing. And I've talked about this before, that as engineers, architects, builders, it's not always our strong point is marketing. But we are, particularly architects out there, very good at making things look good. And you've got to make policy look good. You've got to make it look appealing. And that's part of that tweak, getting some marketing people involved, getting it, because it's all about communication, right? How you communicate both upwards to the policy makers, the decision makers, but also out to the wider public. How do you make it look really attractive, but also have the content in there that's going to make the difference? So
good point. I've my son just had a groin pull in soccer, so when I hear the term stretch code, I think about groin pull quick. It's not good.
Sounds
And I think
painful.
Yeah, it was. Right, and who wants to do that for their building code? And you're right. I think the step also not only it implies we can make these steps. It's easy to take a step up a staircase, and it also implies this direction. She mentioned the national effort is being called a tier code, and so I wonder if that loses a little bit of the clarity around that, like, sense of we all are taking these steps to the end goal. So she alluded to some potential concerns about it at this point being entirely voluntary and stuff. So it's interesting.
And
there's that connection.
There are definitely some challenges to ensure that the content stays there and it does perform the way it needs to, because people can dress things up as being this amazing forward-thinking piece of legislation or piece of policy, but you do need to look under the hood and make sure that it does have the parameters in there, particularly focusing on the performance. If you can include things like airtightness and requirements and actual testing, scientific testing of how buildings are put together, then that's going to be the real meat in there, the real guts of the strength of a code that's going to have really good outcomes. I want to just emphasize the fact that this is doable. They've proven that it can be done, and therefore it can be implemented. And there's a ton of resources that Robyn and the team have made available, and we'll put some links to those so that people can find them, because this is repeatable, and there are some great lessons that have been learned, and there are multiple reports that have been written that you can take wherever you are and translate those, transform them, and implement something similar in your jurisdiction. Take it to your politicians wherever you are, so that we can create change and have this ripple effect of similar types of building codes around the world. And then we can all be moving towards, ideally, 2030 targets, not 2050 targets.
That's right.
Awesome. All right. Well, we've got, it's a busy day as this podcast is dropping. It is the Policy Summit, which is very exciting. But what else have we got going on at the Accelerator?
Yeah, well, the Policy Summit will happen at 7 Eastern time and 4 Pacific time in North America. So that is going to be a Tuesday midday for you in New Zealand, right?
It's in my calendar at some stage.
Yeah. So really, it's a great lineup of folks, including Robyn. Please join us, and we'll include a link to registration in the show notes. And then on Tuesday, Wednesday, your time, we have Passive House Accelerator Construction Tech, and we'll have 3 speakers from Monadnock Construction firm in New York, and they are going to be talking about this big multifamily passive house project. I'm looking at the rendering now. It's a very impressive building, and really cool to hear from a construction team about this kind of scale of passive house building. So join us for Construction Tech Tuesday, and then the Global Passive House Happy Hour happens on Wednesday our time, Thursday, New Zealand and Australia. And that is going to be sharing perspectives from a developer of passive house and net zero condos. So this is Zaina Talje will be presenting for us at the happy hour. So please join us, and we'll look forward to toasting to passive house acceleration.
Awesome. So much going on as always. Thank you very much, Zach, for this episode, as I alluded, for reaching out to Robyn in the first place, and for putting the Policy Summit and indeed our policy theme for April together. I think it's a really important topic. So if you haven't had the chance, definitely go back and listen to some of the other episodes that we've done focusing on policy, because this is the way that we can have changed beyond just the one or two projects that we might happen to be working on at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Matthew. It was a really great conversation with Robyn. Appreciate it.
All right, we'll be back again next week on the Passive House podcast. Thanks for listening in.